The humid Louisiana air hung heavy over the small duplex in Newark, New Jersey, as Lucille O'Neill folded the last of the laundry in the dim light of the single lamp she could afford to keep on after 9 p.m. It was 1978, and at 26 years old, she was already the mother of 4 children, with 6-year-old Shaquille being the eldest. The walls of their cramped apartment seemed to close in around her, as she listened to the sounds of her children sleeping in the next room. They're peaceful, breathing a stark contrast to the storm of worry that constantly churned in her mind. Lucille had learned early that life wouldn't hand her anything easily. Born and raised in Louisiana, she had grown up understanding the value of hard work and the power of faith. But nothing had prepared her for the reality of raising 4 children virtually alone, with a husband whose presence was more sporadic than reliable. The weight of responsibility pressed down on her shoulders like a physical burden. But she had made a promise to herself and to her children. They would have better than what she had known. "Mama, I'm hungry," came a small voice from the doorway. Little Shaquille stood there, already towering over his siblings, despite being only 6 years old, his large eyes reflecting the soft light from the lamp. Even then, there was something different about him. Not just his size, but the way he carried himself, the quiet intelligence that seemed to live behind those gentle eyes. "Come here, baby," Lucille whispered, opening her arms to him. As he nestled against her, she could feel his rapid growth even in the way he fit against her frame. "Mama's got some crackers and peanut butter. That sound good?" Shaquille nodded, but Lucille could see something else in his expression, an awareness that shouldn't belong to a child his age. He had begun to notice things. The way she counted pennies before going to the store, the way she sometimes skipped meals so there would be enough for them, the way her shoulders sagged when she thought no one was looking. As she prepared the simple snack, Lucille's mind wandered to the conversation she'd had with her mother that afternoon. "Lucy, you can't keep doing this alone," her mother had said, her voice heavy with concern. "Those children need stability, and you need help." But Lucille knew that the kind of help her mother was referring to, finding a man to take care of them, wasn't the answer. She had seen too many women lose themselves in that pursuit, sacrificing their children's well-being for the promise of security that never came. No, she would find another way. She had to. The next morning brought the familiar routine of getting 4 children ready for school and daycare, on a schedule that would make a military commander proud. Lucille had it down to a science. Wake up at 5:30 a.m., start breakfast, wake the children at 6, get everyone dressed and fed, pack lunches from whatever she could manage, and have everyone out the door by 7:15. "Shaq, help your sister with her shoes," Lucille called out as she stuffed papers into her own bag. She was pursuing her college degree, taking classes whenever she could fit them around work and childcare. Education, she believed, was the key that would unlock a better future for all of them. "Yes, ma'am," Shaquille replied, already displaying the respectful nature that Lucille was determined to instill in all her children. He knelt down to help his little sister, his large hands surprisingly gentle as he tied her shoelaces. The walk to the bus stop was a daily adventure. Shaquille had appointed himself the protector of his siblings, walking slightly ahead and constantly looking back to make sure everyone was keeping up. Other parents in the neighborhood had begun to notice the O'Neill children, not just because of Shaquille's unusual height, but because of their behavior. They were polite, well-mannered, and clearly cared for, despite the obvious signs of their family's financial struggles. "That boy of yours is something special," Mrs. Henderson, an elderly neighbor, told Lucille one morning as they waited for the school bus. "I see how he looks after those little ones. You're doing something right, honey." Lucille felt a warm flush of pride, but it was tempered by the constant anxiety about whether she was doing enough. Every day felt like a balancing act on a tightrope, with no safety net below. One unexpected expense, one missed day of work, one sick child when she couldn't afford child care. Any of these could send their carefully constructed life tumbling down. That evening, as she sat at the kitchen table with textbooks spread around her and the children finally asleep, Lucille allowed herself a moment of vulnerability. The tears came quietly, as they always did. She had learned to cry silently, so as not to wake the children or add to their worries. But even in her moments of despair, she could feel something deep inside her, a strength that seemed to grow stronger with each challenge. She thought about her grandmother's words, spoken years ago but still echoing in her heart. "Baby girl, the Lord don't give you more than you can handle, but He sure do like to see what you're made of." Lucille was beginning to understand that she was made of something stronger than she had ever imagined. By 1982, the O'Neill family had moved to San Antonio, Texas, following Lucille's marriage to Philip Harrison, a career military man who would become the father figure that Shaquille and his siblings desperately needed. The transition wasn't easy. 4-year military moves had become their norm, taking them from base to base, city to city, each relocation requiring the family to start over once again. 10-year-old Shaquille had grown to an astounding 6'6", making him a curiosity wherever they went. But it was more than his height that set him apart. Despite their constant moves and financial struggles, Lucille had instilled in him a sense of responsibility and character that impressed adults and earned him respect from his peers. "Shaq, I need you to understand something," Lucille said one evening, as they sat on the steps of their base housing in Germany, where Philip had been stationed. The setting sun painted the sky in shades of orange and pink, and for a moment, the military housing complex almost looked beautiful. "People are going to expect things from you because of your size. They're going to think they know who you are before they even talk to you." Shaquille, whose legs now dangled off the step like those of a grown man despite his young age, nodded thoughtfully. "Like how people think I'm older than I am." "Exactly like that," Lucille confirmed. "But I want you to remember that your size is a gift, but it's not what makes you special. What makes you special is what's in here," she said, placing her hand over his heart. "Your kindness, your intelligence, your ability to make people smile. Those are the things that matter." The constant relocations had taught the O'Neill children to adapt quickly, but they had also created challenges that Lucille worked tirelessly to address. Each new school meant new teachers who had to understand Shaquille's situation, a giant of a child who was actually younger than he appeared, with a gentle spirit that contrasted sharply with his imposing physical presence. "Mrs. Harrison," Lucille had taken Philip's name after their marriage, "we're a little concerned about Shaquille's behavior in class," his teacher at the American school in Germany said during a parent conference. "He seems to be holding back, not participating as much as we'd like to see." Lucille leaned forward, her protective instincts immediately activated. "What do you mean by holding back?" "Well, in physical education, for instance, he barely participates. And during group activities, he tends to step back and let others lead, even when it's clear he has." "Good ideas." That evening, Lucille sat down with Shaquille in their small kitchen, the fluorescent light casting harsh shadows that made the moment feel more serious than their usual conversations. "Baby, your teacher says you're not participating in class the way you could be. Is there something wrong? Are the other kids giving you trouble?" Shaquille fidgeted with his hands, which were already larger than most adults. "Mama, when I play sports with the other kids, I hurt them sometimes. Not on purpose, but because I'm so much bigger. And when we do group projects, if I share my ideas, the teacher always makes me the leader. And then the other kids get mad because they think I'm trying to show off." Lucille felt her heart break a little. Here was her son, blessed with extraordinary physical gifts, trying to make himself smaller to fit in with the world around him. She recognized the dilemma. How do you teach a child to embrace their gifts while still being considerate of others? "Shaquille, look at me," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "God gave you your size for a reason. He gave you your mind for a reason. And He gave you your heart for a reason. Your job isn't to hide those gifts. It's to learn how to use them in a way that lifts other people up." Over the following months, Lucille worked with Shaquille to find that balance. She encouraged him to join the basketball team, where his size was an advantage rather than a burden. But she also insisted that he maintain his grades and continue to treat his teammates with respect and humility. The basketball court became Shaquille's sanctuary, the one place where his extraordinary size felt normal, even advantageous. But Lucille made sure he understood that basketball was just one part of his life, not the entirety of it. "I don't care if you become the best basketball player in the world," she told him one day as she drove him home from practice. "If you're not a good man, none of that other stuff matters. You understand me?" "Yes, ma'am," Shaquille replied, and Lucille could see in his eyes that he truly did understand. The military lifestyle had unexpected benefits for their family. The structure and discipline that came with base life provided a stability that their previous civilian life had lacked. Philip's presence as a father figure gave Shaquille a male role model who emphasized education, respect, and hard work. But it was still Lucille who remained the emotional cornerstone of the family, the one who kissed scraped knees, helped with homework, and provided the unconditional love that every child needs. As they prepared for yet another move, this time back to the United States, Lucille reflected on how much they had all grown. Shaquille was no longer the uncertain boy who tried to hide his gifts. He was becoming a young man who understood that his size came with responsibility, but also with opportunity. "Mama," he said one evening as they packed boxes in their German apartment, "I know we move around a lot and I know it's hard on you, but I want you to know that wherever we go, as long as we're together, it feels like home." Lucille paused in her packing, overwhelmed by the maturity and thoughtfulness of her son's words. At 13, he was already 6'8", and could have easily been mistaken for a college student, but in that moment, she saw the tender-hearted boy she was raising, the one who noticed when she was tired, who helped with his siblings, without being asked, who carried himself with a dignity that had nothing to do with his height. The gymnasium at Robert G. Cole High School in San Antonio buzzed with an energy that was almost electric. It was 1989, and 17-year-old Shaquille O'Neal had just dominated another game, his presence on the court so commanding that college scouts filled the bleachers at every home game. At 7-1 and still growing, he had become a local legend, but for Lucille, watching from her usual spot in the stands, he was still her baby boy. "Mrs. Harrison, I need to speak with you about Shaquille's future." Coach Dave Madura approached her after the game, his face serious but excited. "The college offers are pouring in. LSU, North Carolina, Georgetown, they all want him, but we need to make sure he's making the right decision." Lucille nodded, but her expression remained cautious. She had watched other talented young men from their neighborhood get swept up in the promise of athletic scholarships, only to find themselves unprepared for life when sports didn't work out. "Coach, I appreciate all the interest, but my son's education comes first. Always." That conversation would replay in her mind many times over the following months, as their small apartment became a revolving door of college recruiters, each one promising Shaquille the world. The attention was overwhelming, and Lucille found herself in the position of having to protect her son from the very opportunities they had worked so hard to create. "Mama, Coach Brown from LSU says I could start as a freshman," Shaquille said one evening, his excitement barely contained as he sorted through recruitment letters that covered their kitchen table. "Can you imagine? Me, starting for LSU?" Lucille sat down across from him, pushing aside some of the letters to look directly into his eyes. "Baby, I can imagine a lot of things. I can imagine you getting a degree from LSU. I can imagine you becoming a teacher or a businessman or whatever you want to be. Basketball is a gift, but education is insurance." The decision-making process was complicated by factors that went beyond basketball. Louisiana State University offered the chance for Shaquille to stay relatively close to home, in a state where Lucille had deep roots. But it also meant continuing to navigate the financial pressures that had defined their family life for so long. "I've been thinking, Mama," Shaquille said one day as they walked through their neighborhood, a routine they had maintained since he was small. Even now, at his towering height, he still slowed his pace to match hers. "When I make it to the NBA, I'm going to buy you a house. A big house, where you don't have to worry about rent or moving or any of that stuff." Lucille felt a familiar mixture of pride and concern. "Shaquille O'Neal Harrison, you listen to me. Don't you ever make decisions based on taking care of me. I've been taking care of this family for a long time, and I can keep doing it. You make decisions based on what's best for your future. You hear me?" But even as she said the words, Lucille couldn't deny the hope that flickered in her chest. The possibility that her son might actually make it to the professional level seemed more real with each game, each scout, each newspaper article that featured his picture. Yet she had seen too much to let hope overshadow wisdom. The decision came down to LSU, and in the fall of 1989, Lucille found herself helping Shaquille move into his dorm room in Baton Rouge. The campus was beautiful, sprawling and green, with an energy that spoke of possibility and new beginnings. But as she watched her son organize his belongings in the small dorm room, Lucille felt the weight of transition settling over both of them. "You know I'm proud of you, right?" she said as they finished unpacking. "Not because of basketball, not because of your height, but because of the man you're becoming." Shaquille wrapped his mother in a hug that lifted her feet off the ground, something that had become their trademark embrace. "I know, Mama, and I know why you always say education first. I promise I'm going to get my degree." The LSU years brought new challenges and new growth for both mother and son. Lucille continued working and supporting the family while watching Shaquille's basketball career explode onto the national stage. His games were broadcast on television, his name appeared in national magazines, and the NBA began to feel less like a distant dream and more like an inevitable reality. But success brought its own complications. Suddenly, everyone wanted something from Shaquille. Agents, financial advisors, friends, and family members who had never been particularly close before. Lucille found herself in the role of protector once again. But this time the threats weren't poverty or instability. They were the corrupting influences of fame and money. "Mama, this agent says he can get me deals that will set us up for life," Shaquille told her during one of their weekly phone calls. "He says I should leave school early and declare for the draft." "And what do you think?" Lucille asked, though she already knew what her answer would be regardless of his response. "I think I made you a promise about getting my degree," he said, and she could hear the smile in his voice. "That's my boy," she replied, her heart swelling with pride. The conversation about leaving LSU for the NBA would come up many more times, and eventually, economic reality and professional opportunity would align to make early entry into the draft the sensible choice. But for now, Lucille was content, knowing that her son understood the value of keeping his word and honoring his commitments. As she hung up the phone that evening, Lucille reflected on how far they had all come. The scared young woman who had once folded laundry by lamplight, wondering how she would provide for her children, had raised a son who was now being courted by professional sports franchises. But more importantly, she had raised a son who still called her every week, who still sought her advice, and who still understood that success without character was meaningless. The Los Angeles studio was buzzing with activity as production assistants checked cameras and adjusted lighting for what would become one of the most emotional segments in television history. It was 2023, and Shaquille O'Neal, now 51 years old and a successful businessman, television personality, and retired NBA legend, was about to do something he had never done publicly: tell the complete story of his mother's sacrifice and strength. Lucille, now 71, sat in the green room, her hands folded in her lap with the same quiet dignity she had carried throughout her life. The years had added silver to her hair and lines to her face, but her eyes still held the same determined spark that had carried her family through their most difficult times. "Mrs. O'Neal, we're ready for you," the producer said gently, using the name she had returned to after her divorce from Philip Harrison years earlier. Despite their split, there were no bitter feelings. Philip had been a good father to her children during the years they needed it most. As mother and son took their seats across from the interviewer, the studio fell quiet. This wasn't just another celebrity interview. Everyone present could feel the weight of the story that was about to be shared. "Shaq," the interviewer began, "you've talked about your mother before, but today you wanted to share something deeper. Tell us about Lucille O'Neal." Shaquille's massive frame seemed to shrink slightly as he turned to look at his mother, his eyes already glistening with unshed tears. When he spoke, his voice carried a reverence that commanded absolute attention. "This woman right here," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "This woman sacrificed everything for me and my brothers and sisters. When I was 6 years old, she was working multiple jobs, going to school at night, and somehow still finding time to make sure we knew we were loved." Lucille reached over and gently squeezed her son's hand, a gesture that spoke of countless similar moments of comfort and connection over the years. "Mama used to tell me that my size was a gift from God, but that it came with responsibility," Shaquille continued, his composure beginning to crack. "She never let me think that basketball was going to be my salvation. She always said, 'Education first, basketball second.' Even when scouts were calling and everyone was telling her that I should focus on sports, she made me finish my homework first." The interviewer leaned forward, sensing the depth of emotion building in the room. "Lucille, what was it like raising Shaq during those early years?" Lucille's voice was steady, but her eyes reflected the memories of those challenging times. "Honey, when you're a single mother with 4 children, you don't have time to think about how hard it is. You just do what needs to be done." Shaquille was special from the time he was little, not just because of his size, but because of his heart. He used to help me with the other children, and he never complained, not once, about the things we couldn't afford. "Tell them about the shoes, Mama," Shaquille said softly. Lucille smiled, a mixture of pain and pride crossing her face. "Oh, the shoes. Shaquille's feet grew so fast that we could barely keep up. I remember one time, his shoes had holes in them, and we couldn't afford new ones until I got paid the next week. He stuffed cardboard in the bottom and never said a word to me about it. I found out from his teacher." At this point, Shaquille's composure completely broke. Tears streamed down his face as he struggled to find words. She used to skip meals so we could eat. I didn't realize it then, but I figured it out later. She would say she wasn't hungry or that she had eaten earlier, but she was giving us her food." The studio was completely silent except for the sound of Shaquille's quiet sobs. Lucille reached up and gently wiped his tears, the same gesture she had made countless times when he was a child. "Baby, you don't need to cry about that," she said softly. "That's what mothers do. That's what love looks like." "But you don't understand," Shaquille said, his voice breaking. "You gave me everything. Your time, your energy, your dreams. You put them all into making sure I had a chance. And you never asked for anything back." The interviewer, visibly moved, asked, "Shaq, what would you want people to know about your mother?" Shaquille took a deep breath, composing himself enough to speak clearly. "I want people to know that Lucille O'Neal is the strongest person I've ever met. She taught me that success isn't about money or fame. It's about character. She taught me to treat people with respect, to work hard, to keep my promises, and to never forget where I came from." He turned fully toward his mother, his voice becoming stronger and more determined. "Mama, I know I don't say this enough, but everything I am, everything I've accomplished, it's because of you. The houses, the cars, the championships, none of that matters compared to the fact that you raised me to be a good man." Lucille's eyes filled with tears, but her voice remained steady. "Shaquille, you were always a good man. I just tried not to get in the way of what God was already doing in your heart." "When I was drafted by the Orlando Magic," Shaquille continued, "the first thing I did was buy Mama a house. Not because I felt obligated, but because I wanted her to know that every sacrifice she made was worth it. I wanted her to finally have the security she had given up to give to us." The emotional climax came when Shaquille stood up and knelt beside his mother's chair, taking her hands in his massive ones. "Mama, I love you," he said, his voice barely above a whisper but carrying the weight of decades of gratitude. "I love you for the woman you are, for the mother you've been, and for the example you set every single day. You are my hero." Lucille cupped her son's face in her hands, looking into the eyes of the man who had once been her scared little boy. "And you, my baby, are my greatest blessing. Not because you're famous, not because you're successful, but because you're kind and generous, and you still call your mama every week." The interview ended with mother and son embracing, but the impact of their story had only just begun. Within hours, clips of their conversation were being shared across social media platforms, with millions of people commenting on the raw honesty and deep love displayed between them. The tribute sparked conversations about single motherhood, about sacrifice, about the power of unconditional love, and about the importance of remembering those who help us succeed. It reminded viewers that behind every success story is often a quiet hero who never sought recognition for their sacrifices. In the weeks that followed, Lucille received thousands of letters from single mothers, from children of single parents, and from people who simply wanted to thank her for sharing her story. The woman who had once worried about having enough food for her children had become an inspiration to millions. But perhaps the most meaningful response came from Shaquille himself, who established the Lucille O'Neal Foundation, dedicated to supporting single mothers pursuing education and providing resources for children in need. It was his way of ensuring that his mother's legacy of strength, sacrifice, and love would continue to impact lives long after their story had been told. As Lucille sat in her beautiful home, the one Shaquille had promised to buy her all those years ago, reading through some of the letters she had received, she marveled at how far their journey had taken them. From that cramped apartment in Newark to this moment of recognition and gratitude, she had never imagined that her simple act of loving her children would resonate with so many people. The scared young woman who had folded laundry by lamplight had become a symbol of maternal strength and unconditional love. But in her heart, she was still just a mother who had done what mothers do: love their children with everything they have, ask for nothing in return, and trust that love will be enough to see them through, whatever challenges life may bring. The tribute that made everyone cry wasn't just about a famous son honoring his mother. It was about the recognition that behind every extraordinary person is often an extraordinary story of sacrifice, love, and unwavering faith in the power of family. And in telling their story, Shaquille and Lucille O'Neal had reminded the world that the greatest victories are often won not on basketball courts or in boardrooms, but in the quiet moments when we choose love over fear, sacrifice over selfishness, and hope over despair.